Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Servants. Today we are going to be looking into something rather interesting. See, this will be the first Pretender class servant that I will cover, and what that essentially means is that I'll be writing two episodes in one. Today we are covering the Pretender Hephaestion, mostly in honor of her being one of my first servants in JP. Just a heads up, this will not be a video on Iskander, but he will be a part of it. I do have Iskander on my dock, so that will happen in the future. But without further ado, let's get started. We will begin with an explanation as to what the Pretender class is. As described by Sherlock Holmes in-game, the Pretender class has people who wear a role. In other words, among heroes and anti-heroes, there are those who have been given false representation, deceiving and misleading others to do great deeds. Not a fake or a counterfeit, but someone who deceives even the soul until more power and greater achievements than the real thing remains. Essentially, they are people who either take on the guise of another to allow for greater deeds to occur, or they themselves were actors in the background orchestrating things behind the scenes. A good example of this is Gao Li Shi, who, if you watch my Yang Guifei video, you know as the Emperor's right-hand man, who really ran everything while the Emperor doted on Yang. He has the potential to arrive as the shadow of Emperor Zhuangzong. Another good example of a possible pretender could be Jack the Ripper, given their mysterious nature. The Pretender class is a welcome one in my opinion, being a class that has advantage over the Knight class, similar to the Alter Ego class is with the Cavalry class. But that's enough of that, let's get to the real Hephaestion. Hephaestion was supposedly born in the year 356 BCE. The actual date is unknown, but it is speculated that it was around the same time as Iskander. Hephaestion would become a page for the royal court of Macedonia in the year 343 BCE at the age of 13. There is only one surviving record of his youth, and this is for good reason. Spoilers for later, but Hephaestion would die before Iskander, and as such, the generals that did outlive Iskander did not record anybody aside from themselves when recounting their own lives. Thus, much about Hephaestion is limited, so as such, bear with me when I use words like allegedly and supposedly. Hephaestion is mentioned to have been a friend of Iskander's and a sailing buddy of his when Iskander was 15 years old. This indicates that it is possible that Hephaestion was studying alongside Iskander under Aristotle, though it should be noted that Hephaestion's name does not appear in any records as ever being a student to the philosopher. However, there were records to indicate that they did have correspondence with each other through letters. Hephaestion then vanishes from the historical record for a while. However, the implications are that he remained by the side of Iskander, receiving a similar upbringing, education, and training. He would have been raised from a fairly young age to fight, and as such, would have likely fought alongside Iskander in his first major battles, the campaign against the Thracians, as well as Philip II's Danube campaign. Though he is not listed among any of the officials in the battle, which he would very much have qualified. So, this implies that he would only receive his promotion after Iskander took the throne. Note, this was not a corrupt situation either, with Iskander promoting his close friends to higher offices. Iskander was notable for promoting only those who had earned the right to be where they were, meaning that Hephaestion must have proved himself to Iskander at some point, and with good reason, as we will come to see. Hephaestion was multi-talented as a soldier and a diplomat. A good example of this is that on their campaign they received word from the kingdom of Sidon that they had surrendered to them to avoid conflict. Iskander tasked Hephaestion with finding a new ruler. Rather than just picking a random member of the royal family or a Macedonian, he asked the locals what they thought. They all pointed to a former noble whose honesty had led him to becoming a gardener. Hephaestion assigned this man as ruler, and he led a successful career as king. He was also capable of bringing together uneasy allies and maintaining order, as we see in the 332 BCE when he was tasked to sail troops to Gaza along the coastline. These troops were new and from various lands, but Hephaestion managed to keep them in order. Allegedly, Hephaestion led the charge against the Persian army against Mazaeus, a commander to Darius III. Despite the Persians having an overwhelming advantage, the Macedonians prevailed because Mazaeus threw the fight away. It is suggested that this was because of a conversation that he had with Hephaestion, and the historical record may back this up, as Mazaeus would be assigned a ruling position in Babylon later on. So it is possible that they struck a deal and that this is what won the Macedonians the battle. Hephaestion would support Iskander in his decision to reconcile with the Persians, an unpopular idea of the king's. In Babylon, Iskander tasked Hephaestion with identifying and verifying nobles amongst the prisoners captured. This is because the Macedonian leaders bore witness to a former noblewoman forced to dance for their entertainment, and Iskander was put off by this. The fact that Iskander trusted Hephaestion to take care of this job in particular shows that Hephaestion had a sense of sympathy. On the flip side, he was also a proponent for torture and even carried out many of these on his own. In 330 BCE, he would be appointed as joint commander of the companion cavalry along with Cleotus. Then, in 327 BCE, he and Iskander set out to conquer India. Iskander took half of his army to Swat Valley and left the other half to Hephaestion and Perdiccas, where they marched through the Khyber Pass. Hephaestion's orders were simple: conquer all places you go, either by agreement or by force. While the orders were simple in nature, the execution would be a bit more complex. This was largely unknown territory to the Macedonians, so the decisions of whether to be diplomatic or aggressive would need to take place through rudimentary observation. Undeterred, he marched his army to Indus in a fully successful campaign and met back up with Iskander. In 326 BCE, he was a participant in the Battle of the Hydaspes River. This battle is notable for Iskander's military cunning, crossing a monsoon-swollen river to intercept the army of King Porus, resulting in his defeat. This battle was also necessary as the army needed to travel the Hydaspes River for an easier route home. Once they entered into hostile territory, Iskander split his army into 3 ways, and sent Hephaestion with his group 5 days in advance with the intent to intercept or capture any enemies they found. Iskander's group took a detour to subdue an enemy tribe, but Iskander himself was injured in the process. As a result, Iskander entrusted the majority of his army to Hephaestion while he recovered. They traveled down the Indus River to the sea, and upon reaching the coast they constructed a fort at Patala to rest and organize their forces. Hephaestion was left in charge of the fort while Iskander went forward. They would reunite at Rambasha and then together cross the Gedrogan Desert. This harsh journey across the desert resulted in Iskander showering Hephaestion with honors of bravery. By this point he was unquestioningly the right hand of the king of conquerors, fully devoted to his king. However, life would not be so kind to this loyal man. He would die not from a fight in war for the glory of his emperor, nor captured and tortured by a vengeful enemy. In the year 324 BCE, he and Iskander, as well as the rest of the army, would march towards Ecbatana, where festivals and games were being hosted. Iskander and many of the others participated in this joyous occasion, but Hephaestion had fallen ill. He had feverish symptoms and was holed up in his room while being tended to by a doctor. But after 7 days of worsening conditions, it became clear that he would not last long, and so Iskander was summoned to see his second-in-command. However, before he could make it to him though, Hephaestion had passed on. It is theorized that he ignored his doctor's orders due to him being a young soldier. The day of his death, his doctor checked on him, and he appeared to be recovering, so he left. Hephaestion ate a boiled fowl and drank some wine, and then died. The official account is that he'd been successfully recovering after the 7 days, but his meal had caused him to relapse and die. This falls in line with the disease that Hephaestion had caught, being typhoid, and the solid food that he ingested severely irritated his ulcerated intestines, causing internal bleeding which killed him. But this would be rarely fatal, so the jury is still out on what actually got him. Hephaestion was cremated and his ashes brought to Babylon, where he would be granted divine honors. The death of Hephaestion weighed heavily on the mind of Iskander. In an expression of his grief, he ordered the tails and manes of all of his army's horses to be shorn and banned music, and that for 3 days Iskander did not eat or tend to himself. He mourned through screams and sulking and had the doctor who had left Hephaestion hanged for his neglect. He had the shrine of Asclepius destroyed as the god of medicine had clearly forsaken him, and finally Iskander himself cut his hair short and threw it upon a fire, an act reminiscent of Achilles doing the same at the death of Patroclus. However, Iskander's quest was far from over, and he was still a conqueror, so he and his forces marched on. However, the grief clouded his mind and judgment, and he slaughtered the Kasaans as an offering to Hephaestion. As they went forth, they erected several shrines in his honor. But that is the life and death of Hephaestion, the second-in-command to the king of conquerors, but that is not who we summon to Chaldea. Our biggest red flag to know this is that we summon a female claiming to be Hephaestion. The second tell is that Waver does not recognize him amongst the ranks of Iskander's noble phantasm. Allow me to explain. I am completely unable to pronounce Iskander's NP's name, but it loosely translates to Eternal Companions. This allows for Iskander to summon his followers to his side to fight alongside him. In other words, he can summon his entire army to fight with him, while also creating a reality marble. For reference, it is stated that this NP rivals Gilgamesh's in terms of power. Fun side note, during the Fourth Holy Grail War, Waver pledged eternal allegiance to Iskander, so it is unknown if when he dies he will join the ranks of his noble phantasm, but I like to think that it will. But amongst all of these military personnel, Waver does not recognize the Hephaestion that we summon. This is because she is not Hephaestion. This person was never given a name when they were born, so they are called Faker, as it is the first name that they were ever actually given. Her birth was one orchestrated by Iskander's mother, Olympias, who saw the great potential in her son and wanted a confidant who would never betray him, a mage who would protect him from the many curses that would surely be cast upon him. The real Hephaestion would become the former, and Faker the latter. She was to act as Iskander's shadow and as a body double for him. As she possessed no name, Faker could use impersonation magic to swap with Iskander. She would also do this for her brother, the real Hephaestion, as well. This appalled Iskander though, who would on several occasions attempt to give her a real name and identity. However, she would deny these attempts, content with being his shadow. She is also responsible for any historical inaccuracies that differ from Fate's Iskander and the real one, supposedly spreading counterintelligence across the world. The reason that she refuses to be summoned by Iskander's noble phantasm is because she resents his army. This is because she also felt a form of resentment towards Iskander, who never let go of his dream to see Okeanos. But let's explore this rejection a bit more because it answers a question I have been posed. When Iskander's noble phantasm is activated, it puts out the call to be summoned to all members of Iskander's army. When this happens, they are given all knowledge of the army's history. In this process, Faker learns of the War of Succession that broke out after Iskander's death, which was an incredibly scuffed breaking up of all the territories, turning ally into enemy and diffusing all of the progress Iskander had worked toward. Thus, she hates her allies in the army for this and rejects the summon. Servants summoned by the Grail or by the world are given knowledge about the modern era, and Iskander's noble phantasm provides this information in the exact same way. Fun side fact, Faker was a follower of the god Dionysus, hence why her staff has grapes on it. Also, she is able to outdrink the other generals of the Macedonian army, apparently leading to a deepened hatred between her and the generals. But now let's look at her skills and the like. She has Mystic Eyes of Compulsion, which I don't believe appears in-game, which takes control of who she looks upon and can force them to speak the truth. Incredibly useful for being the shadow of an emperor. Her skill, for he is another Iskander, is her ability to become Iskander. She has rapid casting, mostly from her original class likely being that of a caster. Finally, she has Blessings of the Nameless, making herself a proxy for her master, taking any damage that they would be taking. It also removes curses. She possesses 2 noble phantasms. She can use a minute form of Iskander's MP when For he is another Iskander is active. But her main noble phantasm is Hecatic Wheel, which is a mock of Iskander's Gordius Wheel, though hers is drawn by skeletal wyverns rather than bulls. Hephaestion was the purely loyal hand of the king. While the likelihood of a shadow set to absorb curses is non-existent, the truth that Hephaestion's own abilities heavily influenced the King of Conquerors is set in history. I personally want to see more of these characters appear in-game at some point. There's an entire event now that can be done as a recreation of the Wars of Diadochi, with Hephaestion trying to correct everything, but that's just wishful thinking. But that is it! Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments, like this video as it really does help out the channel, subscribe to catch these as they go up, follow my Twitch to throw things at me, I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up, peace.